Wow, what a neat place this is. And I should have moved here. Atlanta is not the Atlanta I left in 1989.
No.
You know, given a lot of talk to Legatus groups. I was with Tom Monahan basically the year he founded it, up in his cabin in Ypsilanti. And I just, I don't want to give you the typical Legatus feel-good speech. I don't want you to walk out here feeling inspired and lifted up and edified and on cloud nine, because that's not what is called for at this moment in time. We are facing a crisis. I want to talk about how did we get to the point in the United States, our nation, where first graders, second graders, and third graders are being pushed by their public school teachers to examine their gender, to consider biologically male kids, to examine whether they should be either homosexual or even women or both. How did we get to the point in our country when all the public schools adopted something called critical race theory, which claims that the U.S. Constitution, United States founding, the main reason for it was to protect slavery in the South? That's just factually wrong. How did we get to the point in this country when a Smithsonian Museum, the Black History Museum, would publish a list about whiteness and describe what whiteness is, one of attribute of which is inherently racist? And I could go on. If you read the paper, I don't read the paper anymore, I watch Fox, because there's no good papers out there. None, zero, except maybe Wall Street Journal editorial pages. That's it. Maybe Financial Times from overseas. Certainly not any of the British papers. Your news, where do you get your news? Well, what we've got, because all the major media are the enemy and being run by the enemy and are anti-Christian. They're even anti-monotheistic.
Right.
This is why there's so much anti-Semitism in the air these days. Because what do the Jews stand for? They stand for one God, an absolute, a law. It's not conditional based upon your ethnicity or your gender or your nationality. It is one law and creation, that the whole world belongs to God because God made it, and that if we don't recognize that we're creatures of God, we will lead ourselves, our families, our communities, our nations to destruction. Now, you guys have got to get interested in ideas. I've been talking about ideas to Legatus groups, or in my Catholic magazine days, or you guys have got to care about ideas. And you haven't been caring about ideas. You've been caring about what? Feeling good about so-and-so, or being uplifted by such a message, or ideas have caused this disaster we're living in. Now, I'm going to just start when I was 14 years old. I'm 72. I want to tell you some ideas that came along since I was 14. I've lived through it. Many of you have too. But I was in the academic world, University of Texas, 4 years. Princeton Theological Seminary 3 years. I was a Baptist. Emory University 5 years. Taught at Mercer, Atlanta 10 years. Became a Catholic in the middle of that. Fordham University, New York University. I was 45 years old before I left academics. I was on the front lines. And even from my college days, I was fighting liberals. I was president of the Baptist Student Union of the University of Texas. And I'm telling you, what I was fighting was something that you can trace back to 1943, existentialism. Jean-Paul Sartre, in 1943, published a book called Being and Nothingness. You don't need to read it. But it became very influential. What really became influential was his essay, What is Existentialism? The translation of that was taught in every philosophy class in the late 60s and through the 70s. Now, what's wrong with existentialism? You know, on all the things I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about feminism. I'm going to talk about postmodernism. I'm going to talk about black studies, women's studies, queer studies. I'm going to talk about emotivism. I'm going to talk about all of these isms that brought us to where we are. You see, what we're seeing out there right now was started over a half century ago. But people didn't care about ideas unless they were in the academy. Catholics didn't care about ideas. Let's follow the trail. Here's what existentialism is. Imagine life is a blank slate. What the existentialists say is, draw your life, draw your values, draw the virtues, draw your ultimate end. That's your exercise of your freedom. Freedom became defined as that which you define for yourself. For Catholics, freedom is being oriented toward God, oriented toward the Creator, proper orientation. It's not doing your own thing. It's doing the right thing. That's when you're free. Okay, let's talk about feminism. It just so happens that Jean-Paul Sartre's partner was a woman named Simone de Beauvoir, who 5 years later wrote The Second Sex. 1949, year I was born. The Second Sex was the beginning of feminism, the theory of it. Now, again, there's a soft side of feminism which is perfectly reasonable. In other words, suppressed women's voices in literature and politics and music and painting and all. In other words, voices that were suppressed because males didn't think women should be heard from. We all know this. And feminism has done a lot to correct that. We've discovered a major female composer, black lady, Florence Price, whose symphonies are now being played by the Philadelphia Orchestra and overseas. And there's all kinds of people, women that have been discovered. Hildegard of Bingen, female philosopher, doctor of the church, 10th century. But there's a dark side of existentialism and feminism. The dark side is this: you create your own values, you create your own sense of existence, and in the case of feminism, you lay on man an inherent power problem. Men, by definition, represent power over subservient beings, beginning with women. Men are blamed for having they're not credited with maybe coming out of it, maybe learning their lessons, maybe, realizing, yeah, it was wrong to do that. No, because why? Because in the past, men did do it. Therefore, we are irredeemable, as Hillary Clinton would say. Okay, postmodernism, 1961. Michel Foucault, Madness and Civilization. His basic thesis was, there's no real madness. It's only from a point of view of a civilization. In other words, from the point of view of white males and the norms they represent. All these people in asylums shouldn't be there. These are artificial norms of behavior, artificial norm of speech, manners, and so forth. That began we now live in a postmodern age. You may have heard the name Jacques Derrida. He's the one that really carried postmodernism into academics in America. And what we have in America is almost, I'm going to say 95% of colleges and universities, this is true of Catholic universities, are made up of committed postmodernists, feminists, and all that has come out of it. Jacques Derrida says a text, when you read something, has no meaning except that which you put into it. They don't have, in other words, words, sentences, don't have fixed meaning. His was an attack on what's called logocentrism. And what does it say in the Gospel of John, the prologue? In the beginning was the Word. That word is logos in Greek. These are attacks on the Judeo-Christian tradition and faith of each. At the heart of all this mess is an attempt to eradicate Christianity, Judaism, and any serious form of Islam from our nation. But we're only halfway there. What happened in 1963? JFK was shot. Tremendous wound. I was on a playground in Fort Worth, Texas. He was shot in Dallas. I went home. I was sad. My parents, who were native Texans, says, well, he got what he deserved coming to Texas. Now, I thought that was wrong. I was only, 12? I don't know. The point is, when you look at how our nation has changed positively since those days, the days of MLK, who was shot in 1968, Bobby Kennedy shot the same year. We have come so far as a nation on race, on women's rights. Like, for example, another part of feminism that's perfectly true is the right to work, the right to have the same job, the same salary, the same respect. That's all right. But when you look under it and you look at the metaphysical, or really anti-metaphysical foundation under it, it's a total rejection of nature. What is nature? Nature is how God created the universe. The 7 days of creation are just development, are just instances of more nature being developed. A nature defines what your end is, what it is you're trying to achieve. It's natural to you. A flower seed, it blooms, a tree grows. A nature defines what you are and what is good for you and what is bad. What's bad for a flower? What? Lack of rain. Golf swings, bad ones. And also in 1967, the Catholic Church in America went off the rails. How? the Land of Lakes Conference of College Presidents. That's when all the Catholic colleges decided, we want to be as good as Harvard and Yale, which were already sold out to existentialism and feminism and queer studies. We'll talk about that. And crosses came down in Catholic colleges, right? And at the same time, what is called liberation theology showed up. Paulo Freire published his Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Gustavo Gutierrez, in 1971, published his Theology of Liberation. Now, Pope John Paul II put him on his knees on a tarmac in South America and told him to repent. But it was too late. Why? Because almost all of the Catholic seminaries and colleges in the United States had bought it. When you talk about an idea, the idea of salvation was changed. The idea of salvation became preferential option for the poor. It became social justice. Forget about eternity. When's the last time you ever heard anybody preach, and I'm sure their present company accepted, anybody preach about your soul is destined for heaven or hell? That is salvation. What salvation in this world is living a virtuous life in communion with the church, in communion with Jesus, our Lord Jesus Christ. This is what we call the imperfect happiness that's leading to the eternal happiness to come. I wrote a book on happiness, but it's not back there. Now, Land of Lakes Conference, Liberation Theology. In 1968, Pope Paul VI, because he didn't get what he wanted out of Vatican II, published Humanae Vitae. All of the American Catholic theology professors, with exceptions like Germain Grisey and a few others, rejected Humanae Vitae. In fact, they published a document with signatures out of Catholic University saying they rejected the teaching of Humanae Vitae, the encyclical about birth control. So, we haven't even gotten to 1973 and Roe versus Wade. Given what I've said, you shouldn't be surprised when I get there. Because intellectually, the stage was set. I have another villain, Phil Donahue. And I'm going to tell you why. His show from 1967 to 1996 taught mainly women, if you feel it strong enough, it's your truth. This is called emotivism. If you feel it strong enough, I can't disagree with you. I'll make you cry. I can never say you're wrong because it might hurt your feelings. By the time I got to my first college classroom in 1980, I had a whole classroom full of Phil Donahue watchers. Because when I would say, you're wrong, they go, what? You can't say I'm wrong. It's my truth. They'll say, but I don't feel that way. And I say, I don't care about your feelings. We're talking about facts. We're talking about ideas. We're talking about arguments, assertions that can be supported by argument and by facts. Now, I'm the most feeling guy you'll ever meet. I am a romantic to the heart. I'm a sentimentalist. Ask anybody who knows me. I play Rachmaninoff when I go to sleep. Da-dee-da-dee-da. And so, it's not that I am a brainiac or that I'm, some sort of, heartless guy. The heart has a place, we know, but it has to be guided by will and reason. This is what Aquinas taught. By the way, the reason I became Catholic while I was teaching at Mercer at the age of 34, because I read St. Thomas Aquinas. Because I read Jacques Maritain and Etienne Gilson and Joseph Pieper. And I listened to Mozart's Requiem. And I read the poetry of Paul Claudel and Dante. I didn't become a Catholic through Bible study. I became a Catholic through the culture of the church, through its intellectual gift to us. I was sitting reading the Summa for the first time under a tree in spring. I was reading in the beginning where Aquinas is talking about, is everything that God made good? And one of the questions he answers, is Satan good? And Aquinas says, yes. He's good because he's a being created by God. I just stopped, and all of a sudden a red bird started singing in the tree next to me. And as I thought the words of Aquinas were being sung. It's a true story. It's in my conversion book. But I knew at that moment, I was a Baptist, teaching at a Baptist school. I was going to become a Catholic. The bird told me.
At least it was a bird.
Then in 1960, what happened in 1971? The Pentagon Papers. Very important. Why? Because the American people found out they had been lied to by LBJ and by Nixon about what was going on in Vietnam. This is not I'm not talking about Vietnam right or wrong. I'm talking about executive power being used to deceive the American people. And what that then caved in, it caved in patriotism, it caved in sense of pride, national pride, all of which feeds into existentialism, feminism, all feeds into postmodernism. In other words, tradition, who cares? I mean, they're all corrupt. Tradition, who cares? Jefferson owned slaves. On and on. Now, Roe came in 1973. Do you know how it was decided? It was decided on the basis of the right to privacy. Really? Well, there's another privacy going on in there too, you know. And in the decision, it talks about you cannot deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process. Isn't it interesting? That's being used to justify taking a life. The due process of the mother is exalted to the point where the life of the unborn can be taken. What about due process for the unborn? In 1974, multiculturalism was adopted by almost all Western nations for their curriculums, except the United States. Now, multiculturalism is like feminism. There's a good side to it. We should know Brazilian novelists. We should know Nigerian poets when they're good. We should know music, written in Chile or whatever. And we have, because of multiculturalism, expanded our awareness of great literature, great art, great architecture, great philosophy, things and so forth. That's all good. But what was really going on in multiculturalism was, let's get rid of the Western great books curriculum. Let's get rid of all these white guys like Homer and Plato and Aristotle, and you know the story. If you've ever heard of the philosopher Mortimer Adler, who started the Great Books program, I was his assistant at the Aspen Institute for 3 years. teaching great books. I wrote a book about the great books called How to Keep from Losing Your Mind. So what happens is, under the veil of, multiculturalism, aren't we accepting, and aren't we open and flexible? Little by little, they hacked away at core curriculums, especially curriculums that required the reading of the great books. In 1968, the first Black Studies program was created. In 1969, the first Women's Study was created. In 1970, the first LGBT major school was, and that became Queer Studies. 1974, Yale. You want your kids to go to Yale? Well, they began Queer Studies. Now, what's wrong with those things? Nothing wrong with Black Studies. A lot of Black voices we haven't heard from were ignored, suppressed, a lot of manuscripts that need discovering, editing, publishing, and so forth. But what we don't need is what Black Lives Matter made out of it, and when it was founded in 2013, to say that whiteness is inherently racist. Inherently. And when they made a list in the Black History Museum of white traits, rationality, bad, order, organization, patriotism, all these things that were supposed to be wrong with whiteness, and you're thinking, how can they be wrong when all successful, happy people have to embrace these things? This is, by the way, in my book, How to Keep from Losing Your Mind. I think it also may be in The Desecrator. In 1989, the first designer babies came along. In 1998, the internet was created. In 1982, the computer was created. The incredible, what have we seen in our lifetime? We've seen the digital age. We've seen libraries removing books and putting in computers. The only way to educate yourself is with a book or a really good documentary on YouTube. There's some great ones there. I watch it. My son has become an expert on China by watching YouTube videos. He lectures me names of emperors, names of empire, and so forth. You gotta read for your whole life. You can't stop just because you gotta read books. You do it. I just finished rereading Melville's Billy Budd, short novella. It is the most powerful statement on human nature, fallen human nature, you'll ever read. It's also a powerful statement on how goodness and innocence attracts attacks. Goodness and innocence, and this is, of course, the saints. That's the story of the saints over and over again. 1992, Casey, the Casey decision. Written by a Catholic. So, you remember what I said about existentialism? How you define your own existence? Robert wrote in the decision about abortion, he said, at the heart, this is Supreme Court. He said, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, meaning, universe, and the mystery of life. So, John Paul Sartre, 1943, Supreme Court, 1992. You gotta care about ideas. This is how we got here by, those of us in academics who were Thomists and Aristotelians and Platonists, or just good old pragmatists, we fought it. All kind of great books have been written about Catholics about the misdirection of the culture, the misdirection of the media. But nobody takes ideas seriously. The average American citizen has to take ideas seriously. Read the Declaration of Independence, our founding document. It attributes our natural rights to the Creator. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. In other words, it's not a godless liberty. It's not a godless pursuit of happiness. It's under the eyes of God. Now, I won't even talk about Obergefell, which made gay marriage licit in all 50 states. But I do want to say something about today, and then we'll take questions. At this moment in time, 1 million people are being held captive in China. 1 million people are being re-educated, forced labor, forced sterilizations. I don't know if I can pronounce the name, Uyghurs. They're mostly Muslim people. 1 million, there's a genocide going on right now. Well, what are we going to do in 3 days? Watch the opening of the Olympics? I'm not. Why haven't we been, we have called it a genocide as a nation. The UN has. Many nations have. But because there's so much money involved, nobody wants to really do anything about it. They're afraid for loss of basketball revenue, or basketball shoe or sneaker revenue. They're afraid the cost of packaging will go up and everything else that comes out of China. So we're sitting, we think we're so superior and advanced as a civilization. We're so far beyond the Nazis, so far beyond the Stalinists, so far beyond the Maoists. How can we say that when we allow 1 million people to be held captive, to be forced slave labor? And yet, we'll speak about it. We'll deliver our diplomatic notes. But we're not going to do anything that costs anybody money. So, I hope, you got to take ideas seriously, because the fundamental ideas, truth, goodness, nature, knowledge, rights, family, marriage, gender, justice, and freedom have been completely changed from how a Catholic Christian understands them to be. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to open it up for questions. If anybody has a question to follow up, okay, I see one back here. We'll start it back.
So just to add 2 names to your list of famous people, Sartre and Michel Foucault. We could add Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yeah.
Well, it all began with Nietzsche, but I wasn't 14 then.
I want to ask you just a essentially very open-ended question. Are you surprised?
No.
Why not?
I'm not surprised, because I saw it growing and I saw it taking over. When you take over all the colleges, universities, that means you're taking over the minds of all the students graduating from them. That means you're taking over the minds of all those who go on to teach in high school and junior high and public school. In other words, the entire teaching profession, like the entire journalism profession, is now in the grasp of all these bad ideas.
Everything that you spoke about this evening was written about in black and white in 1959 in a book called The Naked Communist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you
absolutely.
familiar with it?
Yes. Yeah.
It's the 45 goals of the Communist Party.
Yep.
You can go to your website and type it in Google, the 45 goals of the Communist Party, and realize that that was published in 1959, and it's a blueprint for the society that we are living in right
Yep,
now.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, again, there have been book after book that has pointed out what's going on and why it's wrong and bad. But you guys don't care about ideas. You got to care about ideas, and that means when you get in an argument over something, you got to be able to deliver. You got to be able to set things right in a nice way.
That's good. That's good. That's all right.
Yeah, let's get back to the present right now, and the leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis. And how good a job is he doing in the culture wars and dealing with the present challenges of the Catholic Church and of the world in terms of culture?
Well, you know, Pope Francis says he's pro-life all the time, but he constantly invites world leaders of population control to Vatican conferences. If you're a pro-life leader in the United States, like Father Frank Flavone has been a friend for 30 years, you'll never get invited to the Vatican for anything. In other words, say you're pro-life, but all you people you hang out with are being paid by George Soros. So there's some contradictions going on there that I think tell me a story that is a very disturbing one. That good?
More.
That's good? I could go further, but there's a new book out called The St. Galen Mafia that describes very well how Francis got elected and how Benedict got run off.
Apart from the pro-life issue, do you see any hope in a differentiation between Democratic administrations and Republican administrations?
Well, first of all, the United States has become more pro-life over the last 30 years than it ever was back then. It's becoming largely because of the, what do they call it, photography, the womb photography,
Yeah.
what do they call it?
Ultrasound.
Right. And
We invented it.
and also because of the incredible conversion of Bernard Nathanson and his witness. I was privileged to know him and publish him.
Oh, wow.
Democrats have become the party of the postmodern world.
Yeah.
They've swallowed it. That's why, Joe Biden can't make any sense, because he doesn't believe in hardcore facts. He doesn't believe in kind of truth that measures us. It's all a matter of what he wants to assert, not argue for, assert on a given day. There are some Republicans like that. Yes, sir, there are. I've dealt with them. There's a certain, always been a resistance inside the Republican Party to pro-lifers. But for the time being, we've asserted authority over and leadership over them. But we got to stay on them too. And so for the near future, it's just going to get worse before it gets better.
Thank you for coming and speaking with us, and thank you to Legatus for inviting me as a guest. I believe your central premise was that we don't care enough about ideas, and if only we did, then these bad things would not continue to happen or get worse. And I guess I wonder if that's true, because I believe that everyone in this room would probably ascribe to most, if not all, of the opposite of the ideas that you described, that you laid out. And I wonder if rather we should care about power instead of ideas. Because as you went through your history, what you were continuing to enunciate was not just a great work by some famous leftist, but also a great decision by the most powerful court in the land. And if we all have the ideas, the correct ideas, we follow Christ, which is the most correct idea, then how would that have prevented anything that had happened? And did it? I mean, I don't think it did. So my question is, should we be focused on power? I think someone else mentioned a book that lays out the idea of the long march through the institutions.
Yeah, the problem is not just communism. Communism is just one aspect of it. Okay, I'll give you the example of the University of Notre Dame. And I watched, I gave my first professional paper at the University of Notre Dame in 1980. And you had great teachers there like Ralph McInerney, blessed memory, others, Otto Berg. Notre Dame began a hard left turn about that time, hiring people in gay studies, lesbian studies, doing away with they took their core program and put it over in a special program of liberal arts. And the president of the university began advocating all kinds of left-wing balderdash. Now, I continually ask Notre Dame graduates, alums, are they going to challenge this? Are they going to challenge the leftward swing? Like I mentioned Gustavo Gutierrez, Theology of Liberation. He's 93 and professor emeritus at Notre Dame, the founder of Theology of Liberation. In other words, if alums, and I'm taking that specific example, when they realize, and they should look into it, they should be aware, they should be investigating, especially if they're sending their kids there, of these kinds of programs being required for their students to take, then they should stand up and object. But Notre Dame alums in particular are so loyal, and they so love their moment in the Marian Garden, or wherever that is, that they don't want to stand up to the president or to the priest or to the processoriate. And this has been true all across. Then we have 294 Catholic colleges and universities. There are 10, maybe 12, that you could go to and get an Orthodox Catholic education. Now, the reason you did, those like Christendom, they were formed by people who care about ideas. Thomas Aquinas College, formed by people. Father Michael Scanlon took a far left university, Franciscan, and turned it back to Orthodoxy because he cared about ideas. And now it's a thriving place, even though, we need Father Scanlon back a little bit. So ideas not only correct things from going wrong, they create institutions to take the place of the corrupt ones. Now, your point about power is perfectly taken. But I do think, you look at the French Revolution, 1789. They cared about ideas. It led to the Terror, but ultimately it did overthrow not only the monarchy, but a tyrannical, clerical Catholicism in France. The so-called Second Estate in France during the Revolution, which was made up of the clergy, they just ran their villages and towns like they were little tyrants. Not everybody, but there's evidence of the kind of high-handedness.
Yeah, well, change can often be very, very violent and very terrible and very difficult to go through, but sometimes necessary. We have time for another question. If there's another question, anybody? Yes? Okay.
And there are books back there.
Very simply, what can we do, regular people?
There you go.
Well, I have a chapter in the Desecrators on symbols really count. And I ask in that book, if everybody who voted for President Trump put an American flag on their lawn on the same day, what kind of impact would that have? So I think Black Lives Matter has a brilliant PR. They've got a symbol, they do the yellow stuff on the road and all that. We need to take our symbols, our crosses, our flags, our medals, and we need to make sure people see them and know what we stand for.
I just want any kind of comment about Trump's era. When you worked with Trump, just anything that you want to say about your time with him.
Well, he's not a nice guy.
We all get that.
What's interesting about Trump is that he's very hard to get along with, but he wanted to do the right things. He did very good things. One or two missteps, but overall, on the economy, he's the most pro-life president we've ever had. So, did he have some nastiness in his past? Yes. Don't we all?
Yes.
And does that mean we gonna elect Hillary Clinton, the most pro-abortion politician
Don't make me go.
in the history of the country? Because Donald Trump had some sexual picadillos that, got into the news? Are we gonna elect Hillary Clinton because of that? One thing I point out in my book, this is my last comment. Archbishop Chaput was my hero for years, coming out of Denver, going to Philadelphia. During the 2016 campaign, he published a column in the Archdiocesan newspaper saying between Clinton, Hillary, and Trump, there was moral equivalence. Chaput said that. I wrote a column, answer, but that just shows you. He went to a Democrat city from Denver, and he conformed. Sorry to say. Come here.
Thank you so much.